He was just a skinny kid with slick hair and trembling hands. When Elvis told the reporter his dream, to sing for the whole world, the man laughed, right to his face. But years later, that same reporter sat alone in front of a radio and couldn't stop shaking. June 12th, 1953. Memphis, Tennessee. The air inside Sun Records was thick with heat and cigarette smoke. The hum of the ceiling fan fought the rhythm of typewriters from the next room. Every few seconds, a door creaked. Another hopeful voice left behind silence. A young man waited by the wall, head down, guitar case between his boots. The tag on his work shirt still read, Elvis A. Presley, Crown Electric Company. His palms were slick. He was 19, but looked younger, like a kid trying on his father's confidence. Across from him, reporter Hal Jennings scribbled notes on a pad already half filled with names that wouldn't matter tomorrow. He was doing a small column for the Memphis Press Scimitar called Voices of the South. He'd heard 20 in a row that morning, none worth remembering. When Sam Phillips from the studio nodded for the next singer, Elvis stood. His voice caught as he said, "Sir, I'd like to sing something my mama likes." Hal rolled his eyes. "Make it quick, kid. We close in 5. The room fell quiet. The guitar sounded fragile, out of tune, but when he sang the first line, a slow, aching gospel phrase, even the air seemed to pause. There was pain in it, and prayer, and something wild under the surface. When the last note faded, no one spoke. The reel-to-reel stopped with a click. Then Hal smirked, the kind that hides discomfort behind arrogance. "Not bad," he said, "but the world already has its singers." The kid smiled, polite, as if he didn't hear the insult. "Maybe it needs one more, sir." Hal laughed, a short, cruel sound that bounced off the studio walls. "Dreams are cheap, son. Keep delivering packages." He turned away, lighting another cigarette, already forgetting the name. But the boy didn't move. He just stood there, eyes steady, like he'd memorized the moment. That laugh, it stuck in the room longer than the song. Outside, thunder grumbled across Union Avenue. Elvis walked into the rain with his guitar wrapped in an old towel. The paper under his arm, his only demo receipt, was already bleeding ink. He whispered to himself, "One day they'll remember my name." Inside, Hal handed his notepad to the receptionist. Trash, the last entry. Kids going nowhere. He didn't know that reel, marked Presley scratch take, would sit on Sam Phillips' shelf for months until one late night the producer would play it again and feel his pulse skip. History often hides in boxes labelled discard. Hal went home that evening, wrote a filler paragraph about local amateurs chasing fame, and never even spelled the boy's name right. He filed it under Presley. Years later, that typo would haunt him more than any lie he ever printed. Have you ever been laughed at for believing too big? Would you still chase it when the world tells you to quit? That night, Elvis sang quietly to himself on his truck route, headlights cutting through the rain. The sound bounced off empty streets, raw, lonely, unstoppable, and miles away. In his small apartment, Hal poured another drink, never imagining that same voice would soon drown out every newsroom in America. Hal thought he'd never hear that name again, until the radio proved him wrong. July 8th, 1954. Memphis heat shimmered over the asphalt. Radios buzzed in barbershops, diners, and gas stations, all tuned to WHBQ radio. Inside the booth, DJ Dewey Phillips leaned over a spinning acetate labelled in messy handwriting. "That's all right, Mama. Presley." He dropped the needle. A scratch, a hot beat. Then that wild, joyous sound exploded through the static. It wasn't polished. It wasn't polite. It moved. Phones began ringing before the first verse ended. 1, 2, then a dozen. Dewey winked at his engineer. "Keep it rolling, son." By the end of the second play, 47 callers begged to hear it again. Truckers pulled to the roadside. Teenagers turned up the volume until windows rattled. In diners, forks stopped mid-air. No one had ever heard a voice like that. A southern gospel tone tangled with rebellion. Across town, in a cramped newsroom, Hal Jennings sat half asleep over a stack of unpaid invoices. The radio behind him played softly, just background noise, until that voice came on. His pen froze, that tone, that ache, that certainty. He knew it before the name was even said. The announcer's voice cracked with excitement. That was a brand new local boy, Elvis Presley. And folks, the phones are on fire. Hal's stomach turned cold. The same kid, the same dream he'd laughed at. He turned up the volume. The song played again. He tried to write something, anything, but the paper stayed blank. The world already has its singers. His own words echoed back, now twisted into irony. He stood, pacing the floor, trying to convince himself it was luck, a one-hit wonder, a passing noise. But deep down, he knew the truth. This was the sound of something breaking loose. He called the station. "Who's this Presley kid?" The operator laughed. "Buddy, if you don't know, you will by morning." Outside, cars cruised through Beale Street, blasting that same track on repeat. Someone shouted, "This boy's gonna change everything." Hal walked home under neon reflections, hearing it spill from every doorway. His pride felt heavier than his typewriter. By midnight, WHBQ replayed "That's All Right" 9 times. Newspapers called it a local phenomenon. Sam Phillips couldn't keep up with the calls. Elvis, still in his work uniform, was hiding in the movie theater across town, terrified of hearing himself. When Dewey finally tracked him down, he told him, "You're on the air, boy. People are losing their minds." Elvis blinked, half smiling, half shaking. They like it. They love it. In that moment, a shy kid who once sang for his mama became a spark in a powder keg. Hal couldn't sleep. The melody chased him through the night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy's steady stare from Sun Records, unshaken after his laughter. What do you do when the sound you mocked becomes the heartbeat of a generation? Can you ever unhear the proof that you were wrong? The next morning, Hal typed a new headline. "Local truck driver turns Memphis upside down." For once, there was no smirk behind his words. But guilt is a strange companion. It doesn't fade with headlines. He mailed that first column to Elvis's address, unsigned. Inside, he'd written just 5 words. "You proved me wrong, kid." He never knew if Elvis read it. But 2 weeks later, a small envelope arrived back at the paper. No return name, just a photo of a guitar pick taped to a napkin. On it, one scribbled sentence, "Still chasing that world." Hal stared at it for a long time, and in the quiet hum of the newsroom, he made himself a silent promise, never to laugh at another dream again. Yet somewhere inside him, pride still whispered, "It won't last." He was wrong. Again. Hal picked up his typewriter. This time, not to laugh. January 28, 1956, New York City. Snow piled outside the RCA building as newsroom lights flickered through the night. Elvis Presley's new single, Heartbreak Hotel, had just dropped. By sunrise, it would sell 300,000 copies. In the newsroom of the Daily Chronicle, typewriters clacked like gunfire. Editors barked over cigarette smoke. Coffee burned on every desk. And somewhere in the back corner, Hal Jennings listened to the chaos. The same reporter who once laughed at a dream. "Rewrite page 1, an editor shouted. "Presley's on Ed Sullivan tonight. People are camping outside the studio." Hal's hands trembled as he read the wire. Presley breaks records in 3 states. Fans riot at store signings. He rubbed his eyes and whispered, "He really did it." On the front page photo, Elvis was mid-performance. Eyes closed, mouth open, one hand reaching toward the crowd like he was pulling their hearts out of their chests. The caption read, "The New Voice of America." Hal stared at it until the ink blurred. Outside, the street was a circus. Hundreds of fans pressed against police lines, screaming for a boy from Memphis. A girl fainted when a limousine door opened, even though it wasn't his. History wasn't waiting for permission anymore. It was happening. Inside the control room of the Ed Sullivan Theatre, producers argued about camera angles. "Keep it waist up," one muttered. "That hip movement's got the sponsors nervous." Elvis stood behind the curtain, silent, gripping a silver mic. His manager, Colonel Parker, patted him on the back. "Go show 'em, boy." When the curtain lifted, time cracked. That first note, smooth, reckless, magnetic, hit the audience like a shockwave. Girls screamed so loud the soundboards peaked. The cameraman froze for a second, muttering, "Lord, what is this?" Hal watched from a small black and white television in the newsroom. His cigarette dropped from his fingers. He had covered wars, elections, and courtroom trials. But nothing like this. This wasn't a performance. It was a storm. The same kid he'd told to keep delivering packages was now delivering America itself a new heartbeat. Midway through the set, the broadcast glitched from the crowd's volume. Hal leaned forward, whispering to no one, "That's the voice I laughed at." The show ended in chaos. Fans poured into the streets. Reporters tripped over each other to get quotes. One girl sobbed, "He looked right at me." Hal's editor smacked a fresh headline on his desk. "Presley stops the press, again." "Write something heartfelt," the editor said. "You used to cover music." Hal stared at the blank page. His fingers hovered, then typed slowly. There are moments when sound itself becomes a revolution. Tonight, the boy from Memphis sang his way into history. He stopped, exhaled, then added one more line under his breath. And I almost killed that sound before it was born. He didn't sign his name. Outside, sirens wailed from the crowd control at 54th Street. Flashbulbs flickered like lightning. Teenagers climbed lampposts, chanting his name. "Elvis! Elvis! Elvis!" Hal walked out into the cold air. Snow melted on his coat. He could hear the echo of the song even blocks away. He thought about that day in Sun Records, the cheap guitar, the trembling hands, the kid's quiet voice saying, "To sing songs people remember." Now the whole world was singing them. Do we ever realize we're watching history only after it's too late? How many miracles do we miss because we're too proud to see them? Hal turned the corner and saw a newspaper vendor stacking the fresh prints. Every cover had Elvis's face. A headline in red ink screamed, "Presley redefines music." Hal bought one, folded it under his arm, and kept walking until his fingers went numb. He stopped outside a pawn shop window. Inside, under a layer of dust, sat a second-hand typewriter, the same model as his. He looked at his reflection, whispered, "Maybe it's time to start over." But fate wasn't done with Hal, because 13 years later, under brighter lights and a bigger stage, he'd face the boy he once laughed at, face to face. And this time, the world would be watching. August 3rd, 1969, Las Vegas Hilton. 15 years had passed since that smoky Memphis afternoon. The lights of the strip shimmered like false stars, and inside the showroom, 20,000 people filled the seats, buzzing like electricity before a storm. It was Elvis Presley's comeback show. Hal Jennings, now grey at the temples and slower with his steps, stood near the back with his press badge. His editor had insisted, "You were there at the start, Jennings. Go write the full circle piece." He didn't argue, but inside he dreaded it. The room darkened. The orchestra tuned. The stage glowed red. Then, a single drum beat. The curtain rose. Elvis stepped out, dressed in white, spotlight catching the rhinestones like 1,000 tiny suns. For a moment, Hal forgot to breathe. The crowd erupted. A wall of screams, applause, tears. Women clutched their chests. Men shouted his name like it was a prayer. Even the casino floor below went silent, dealers abandoning tables just to listen. And then came that voice. Older now, deeper, but still carrying the ache of those early gospel nights. When he sang "If I Can Dream," it wasn't just a performance, it was a confession. Every lyric sounded like it had been torn out of his own past. Hal gripped the edge of his notepad, his knuckles white. That laugh, the one he'd thrown at a 19-year-old boy, echoed in his head louder than the music. He thought about every article, every word of doubt. Every night he'd replayed that radio broadcast in secret. Now, standing in this ocean of believers, he realized how small his own cynicism had been. During intermission, a security guard tapped his shoulder. "Mr. Presley would like to see you backstage." Hal froze. "Me?" the guard nodded. He said, "The reporter from Memphis." Backstage smelled of sweat, cologne, and stage dust. Elvis stood by a mirror, towel around his neck, eyes still bright under the lights. He smiled softly. "You're Hal, right?" Hal tried to speak, but words fell apart. I used to cover Sun Records. Long time ago." Elvis laughed gently, not mocking this time, but warm. "I remember. You asked me what I wanted." Hal's face flushed. "And I laughed," Elvis nodded. "Yeah, you did." Then he leaned forward. "But I'm glad you did," Hal frowned. "Glad?" Elvis handed him a small photo, freshly signed. The ink still glistened. Scrawled beneath the image were 6 words. "Thanks for keeping me hungry." Elvis chuckled, voice soft but steady. "If you hadn't doubted me, maybe I wouldn't have fought so hard. Sometimes, disbelief is the best fuel." Hal looked down at the autograph. His throat tightened. All the pride, all the guilt, it melted under that one act of grace. For a moment, the crowd's roar outside vanished. It was just the two of them, the dreamer and the doubter, sharing silence. Hal finally whispered, "You forgave me." Elvis smiled, folding his arms. "Ain't nothing to forgive. We all got our laughs tested by time." The band's cue light flashed. Elvis picked up his mic again. "Gotta get back out there." He turned, then paused. "You still writing?" Hal shook his head. "Not much," Elvis winked. "Maybe you should. World still needs storytellers." When Elvis walked back on stage, Hal stood frozen in the hallway. The roar that followed him felt like thunder. But it wasn't deafening anymore. It was cleansing. For the first time in years, Hal felt peace slipping into the cracks of his regret. He folded the signed photo, slid it into his coat pocket and whispered, "Guess you finally did sing for the world." That night, he didn't file his story right away. Instead, he sat by the hotel window, staring at the Vegas skyline, trying to find the right words. Outside, spotlights swept across the desert sky like searching souls. In his notebook, he wrote, "Kindness humbles guilt more deeply than revenge ever could." He underlined it twice, then closed the notebook. What would you have done in his place? Could you face the man who reminded you of your worst mistake? The next morning, Hal left an envelope at the Hilton's reception desk. Inside was that old Sun Records receipt, the one he'd found years ago in a drawer. On the back, he wrote, "From the reporter who finally believed." He didn't expect a reply, but a week later, a letter arrived at his office in Memphis. It was from Elvis's assistant, Charlie Hodge. Just one line, neatly typed. "Mr. Presley said to tell you, the world's still listening." Hal held the letter against his chest. He smiled for the first time in years. But deep down, he didn't know that his true reckoning was still waiting. 8 years away, in a radio booth on the saddest August morning of his life. August 16th, 1977, Memphis. The newsroom clock read 3:14 p.m. when the wire printer began to clatter. Hal Jennings had been sorting old notes, humming an Elvis tune under his breath. The editor shouted from across the room, "Jennings, get in here. It's about Presley." Hal frowned. "Another concert announcement?" Silence. Then the words no one was ready for. "Elvis Presley, dead at 42. The sound of the printer didn't stop, but the room did. Telephones hung mid-air. Papers fluttered to the floor. Hal's pulse quickened. "No, that can't be right." He grabbed the sheet, reading the bulletin twice. Graceland, heart failure, pronounced dead at Baptist Memorial Hospital, 3:30 p.m., the same city where it all began. Within minutes, every station scrambled for airtime. Cameras rushed toward Graceland, and for reasons even he couldn't explain. Hal Jennings volunteered to anchor the breaking news broadcast. By 4 p.m., he sat alone in the radio booth of Rec Memphis, headset on, red light glowing. He had done 1,000 broadcasts before. This one felt like standing in a confessional. He cleared his throat. The producer whispered, "We're live in 5. The microphone clicked. Hal's voice came out softer than usual. "This is Hal Jennings reporting from Memphis with breaking news that has shocked the world." He stopped. His tongue went dry. He tried again. "Elvis Aaron Presley was found unresponsive at his Graceland home this afternoon." The words cracked halfway through. A faint tremor filled the silence that followed. Across the airwaves, thousands of listeners leaned closer to their radios. The control room operator signaled, "Keep talking." Hal pressed a hand against his chest. He could hear his own heart through the headphones. "I once interviewed Elvis Presley when he was just a boy with a guitar," he said quietly. "I laughed then. I thought dreams like his were too big for our little town. I was wrong." His voice broke completely. The newsroom behind the glass went silent. "If you can hear me now," he whispered, "forgive me, kid." He turned away from the mic, but the producer didn't fade out. The country heard every word. People later said the moment felt sacred, like the whole city wept through one man's confession. When the song cue arrived, Hal didn't reach for a pop hit or a chart topper. He played "Can't Help Falling in Love." As the melody filled the booth, his shoulders shook. He wiped his eyes, failing to hide it. "Wise men say, only fools rush in." The lines floated through static and tears. Across Memphis, drivers pulled over just to listen. Diners turned down their lights. Some called the station just to say they were crying too. Hal whispered over the fade-out. "I laughed once. I never stopped regretting it." He leaned back, staring at the clock. The red on-air light blinked out. Then came silence, the heaviest of his life. That night he didn't go home. He walked through the streets near Union Avenue where Sun Records still stood. Someone had already left flowers on the doorstep. Another left a teddy bear and a note. "We'll never forget." The air smelled of rain and candle wax. Hal stood there for a long time, listening to a crowd singing "Love Me Tender" in the distance. He realized it was the same street where Elvis once walked out into the rain with his demo receipt. History had closed its loop. What do you do when the voice you doubted becomes the echo that carries you? How do you say sorry to someone the world now calls immortal? At dawn, Hal returned to the radio booth. The cleaning crew was gone, the city quiet. He took off his press badge, laid it on the console and whispered, "Rest easy, kid." Even after the broadcast ended, the phone kept ringing. People wanted to share stories, memories, moments when Elvis had touched their lives. Hal listened to each one, answering softly, "Yeah, he touched mine too." But even after the city slept, he couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, that first laugh came back, and so did the song. The boy's voice had never stopped singing, and it never would. June 7th, 1982, Memphis, Tennessee. 5 years after the day the music stopped, Graceland opened its gates to the public for the first time. The line stretched down Elvis Presley Boulevard. Families, soldiers, old fans clutching vinyl sleeves that looked like relics. A quiet wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" Among the crowd was Hal Jennings, 70 now, moving slower, his cane tapping against the pavement. He wore the same press coat he'd worn that day in 1953. The pockets frayed, the ink stains permanent. He didn't come to report. He came to listen. Inside the mansion, sunlight spilled through the glass doors, glinting off gold records that covered the walls. Every plaque told a story. Sold-out shows, chart numbers, decades of applause. Hal paused at one photo. Elvis backstage, towel around his neck, smiling. He remembered that night in Vegas. The note, "Thanks for keeping me hungry." Visitors moved quietly, whispering prayers instead of words. A little boy tugged at his mother's hand. "Mama, is he really gone?" She smiled through tears. "Not if you can still hear him." Hal smiled faintly. He realized the boy was right. You can't bury a voice that changed the heartbeat of the world. When he reached the garden, the air felt still, sacred. The gravestone gleamed under the morning light. Roses, scarves, ticket stubs, guitar picks, gifts left by strangers who somehow felt like family. Hal knelt slowly, knees aching. He placed a small envelope near the stone. Inside was his old press badge, Sun Records, 1953, the one that once let him laugh at a dream. He whispered, "I believe now." The wind picked up, lifting the edges of the letter. For a moment he swore he heard a faint echo, the low hum of a boy warming up a guitar. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Some echoes live forever. He stood, watching the crowd circle the garden. Each person left something. A flower, a tear, a piece of themselves. And Hal realized the laughter he'd once used to tear down had become a lesson millions carried forward. Maybe every dream we mock becomes the mirror of our own fear. Maybe believing in someone else's dream is how we redeem our own. As he turned to leave, a tour guide's voice floated over the speakers. "Welcome to Graceland, the home of Elvis Presley. The king may be gone, but the music never stopped." Hal looked back one last time. The plaque beside the gate read, "To those who never stopped believing." He nodded softly. "Guess I made the list after all." The camera of memory pulled back, the old reporter fading into the crowd, the gate closing behind him, and from somewhere inside, a single piano note echoed like a heartbeat restarting. Because legends don't end, they keep singing. In radios, in memories, and in the hearts of those who finally learn to listen. Sometimes, the people who laugh at your dreams aren't cruel, just afraid to dream again. Elvis didn't prove Hal Jennings wrong. He reminded him what faith sounds like. If you've ever been doubted, share this story. And remember, one voice can still change everything.